Have you ever wondered what it would be like if someone completely unknown quietly changed the course of history without anyone noticing until it was too late? I am going to tell you a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about ordinary people and the power they can hold in the most unexpected moments. It all started on a day that seemed just like any other, and yet everything was about to shift in ways that nobody could have predicted. I was sitting in my small apartment scrolling through headlines when a name caught my eye, a name that meant nothing to me at the time but would soon become impossible to forget. I had no idea that in a quiet corner of the world someone was about to take actions that would ripple across communities, countries, and even generations. I want you to imagine walking down a street where everyone passes by unnoticed, where your choices feel meaningless, and yet one decision could change everything for everyone. And what if I told you that this is exactly what happened to someone who nobody expected to make history, someone who had no fame, no wealth, and no connections, but still managed to leave a mark so profound that even experts are still trying to understand how it happened? You might be thinking that this is just another inspirational story, but the details I am about to reveal will make you question the limits of possibility and the hidden potential of people who seem ordinary and overlooked. This is not about luck or coincidence. This is about determination, timing, and a quiet courage that goes completely unnoticed at first, but eventually becomes undeniable. I promise you that by the end of this story, you will not only be amazed, you will also see the world a little differently and start to notice the hidden stories of strangers around you who might be silently shaping reality in ways you never imagined. I remember feeling a mix of disbelief, excitement, and curiosity as I dug deeper into the events, trying to piece together the sequence of choices, actions, and consequences that led to this moment. And what struck me most was how subtle everything seemed. At first almost invisible, like a whisper, yet its impact was thunderous. I want you to pay close attention to every detail, because the smallest decision, the briefest interaction, and the quietest observation played a role in this remarkable transformation. And if you are watching this right now and you have not yet hit the subscribe button, do it now. Because these stories are rare, these stories are powerful, and they deserve to be shared with everyone who wants to understand the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. And as you stay with me until the end, you will witness how a person who could have been anyone actually became the catalyst for a change that nobody saw coming, yet changed everything forever. And so with that in mind, let us dive straight into the story and discover how a stranger quietly made history, and you will not believe how. After that first glimpse of the story, I had to understand where it all began. The setting was a small town tucked away in a place that most maps ignore, a place where life seemed ordinary, predictable, and safe. But beneath the surface, currents of change were already moving, and nobody noticed. The stranger who was about to step into that world had lived an ordinary life, blending into the background. No one paid attention to him on the streets, in the markets, or even in the small coffee shops where he spent most of his time. He had no reputation, no wealth, and very few connections, yet there was something in his eyes, a subtle intensity, a quiet determination that suggested he was waiting for a moment that only he could see to arrive. It is hard to describe what made that moment possible. Maybe it was a combination of patience, intuition, and an awareness that most people never develop. He noticed things that others miss, small patterns in daily routines, glimpses of opportunities that seemed insignificant at the time but would later prove to be critical. And what makes this story compelling is not just what he did, but why it mattered. In a world where most people struggle to leave a mark, where the extraordinary often seems reserved for the famous, the powerful, or the wealthy, this stranger was about to prove that history can be influenced by anyone willing to act at the right moment. You might ask, why now? Why this story matters today? And the answer is simple: the consequences of his actions continue to affect people and decisions even in places far beyond that town. It is a reminder that ordinary moments can carry extraordinary potential, and that sometimes the most important changes are happening quietly, unnoticed, unrecorded, until suddenly they become impossible to ignore. I want you to feel what it was like for him, walking through the streets, observing the ebb and flow of life, noting how people interacted, how routines repeated themselves, and understanding how these small details were forming the threads of a story that was about to unravel. It is easy to underestimate the impact of subtle actions, yet if you pay attention to the patterns of behavior, even the smallest gesture can start a chain reaction. The town itself was unaware of the coming change. Everything seemed stable, predictable, yet stability can hide fragility and opportunity in equal measure. The stranger seemed to sense this. He noticed the hesitation in conversations, the overlooked needs of people around him, and the inefficiencies that everyone else accepted as normal. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began making choices that seemed inconsequential at the time, but were building a foundation for something far greater. And as I pieced together the sequence of events, I realized that the real story was not about a single heroic act. It was about accumulation, the quiet persistence, the willingness to observe, to think, and to act at moments when others would ignore what was happening. The stage was set. For the conflict that would define the story, the problem that would challenge him, the obstacles that would test his resolve, and the moments where he would face decisions that could either propel him into history or leave him as just another face in the crowd. Every choice mattered, every detail counted, and that is why I kept going back to the moments that seemed mundane, the glances, unnoticed conversations, and small errors that eventually became turning points. And as you stay with me, you will start to see the patterns emerge, the way that ordinary actions intersect with timing, circumstance, and opportunity to create something extraordinary. The stranger's life before the event seems ordinary, but it was in this ordinary context that the seeds of history were planted. The contrast between what seemed normal and what would become remarkable is part of what makes this story gripping. And when you think about it, the tension lies not in extraordinary abilities, but in ordinary people making choices that ripple beyond their understanding. And as I continue to unravel these threads, you will see how everything from his daily habits to his brief interactions with others contributed to a complex web of cause and effect that would eventually lead to a moment nobody could have predicted. And so the context is clear, the setting, the people, the overlooked details, all of these elements were quietly aligning, creating a perfect environment for a stranger to step forward and alter history forever. And with that understanding, we move into the real heart of the story, the problem, the conflict that would define the stakes, the choices, and the courage of this remarkable individual. And that is where the journey truly begins. The moment the stranger realized the challenge ahead of him, he understood that nothing would be simple, that the world he wanted to influence was resistant, indifferent, and often hostile. He faced the problem of invisibility. Nobody believed in him, nobody offered help, and every step forward was met with skepticism or outright dismissal. The townspeople carried on with their routines, unaware of the potential change looming over them. And for him, the stakes were high, not just for personal recognition, but for the consequences of failure. What he was attempting could alter lives, disrupt established patterns, and challenge authorities who had never faced someone so determined and underestimated. Yet the stranger did not hesitate, even as doubt crept in from the outside and from within. The problem was multidimensional. He had to navigate social dynamics that were rigid and sometimes unfair, understand systems that were opaque and unyielding, and make decisions without the safety net of experience, guidance, or precedent. Every choice carried weight. Every action could lead to failure, embarrassment, or worse. But he saw possibility where others saw obstacles. He recognized that the limitations surrounding him were not permanent. They were challenges to be understood, overcome, and leveraged to his advantage. And as I traced his journey, it became clear that the conflict was not just external, it was internal. He wrestled with fear, uncertainty, and the temptation to give up, to fade back into anonymity. Yet something in his mind and spirit kept pushing him forward. He understood the power of timing, of patience, of reading the subtle cues that most people ignored. He noticed patterns in behavior and decision-making and how people reacted to events, and he used this understanding to position himself in ways that made his actions more likely to succeed. The urgency escalated as he began to encounter resistance. The more he acted, the more the world seemed to push back, and every minor victory was met with unforeseen complications. The problem that seemed straightforward at the beginning had layers, complexity, and unpredictability that tested his resolve daily. He had to make choices about who to trust, how to act, and when to wait, observing the consequences of small decisions, realizing that one wrong move could unravel everything. Yet despite the mounting pressure, he maintained focus and clarity. The problem itself became a proving ground, a measure of his patience, intelligence, and courage. And this is what makes the story compelling, not just the challenge, but how a seemingly ordinary person navigates it with strategy, creativity, and quiet determination. As I dug into the details, I realized that this conflict was also a mirror of life itself. Ordinary people constantly face challenges that seem insurmountable, and yet through observation, persistence, and careful action, they find ways to overcome what appears impossible. And the stranger embodied this principle completely. He did not seek recognition. He did not crave fame or applause. He simply understood what needed to be done, and he set out to do it in a way that would ultimately reshape the context in which he lived. The stakes became clear. The problem was not hypothetical, it was real, immediate, and consequential. It involved risks that could affect not just him, but everyone around him, and every obstacle he encountered required rapid assessment, adaptation, and action. It was a relentless test of resolve and ingenuity, yet he pressed on, moving from one calculated step to the next, never losing sight of the ultimate goal. As you follow this story, you will see how these obstacles layer one upon another, creating tension and suspense, how the conflict escalates in ways that are unpredictable yet deeply logical, and how the ordinary circumstances around him make the extraordinary nature of his achievements even more striking. The stage is now set for the escalation of tension, the series of challenges and obstacles that would push him to the brink and force him to make choices that nobody could anticipate. And that is where the next chapter begins, where the stakes intensify, and every decision carries more weight than the last, the escalation of tension that will hold you on the edge of your seat as the story moves inexorably toward the turning point. As the stranger continued to move forward, the challenges grew more complex, more unpredictable, and more demanding than anything he had faced before. Every day presented a new obstacle, a subtle change in circumstances, an unexpected reaction from someone in authority, or a mistake that could unravel weeks of careful planning. He learned quickly that momentum was fragile, that small missteps could cascade into disaster, yet he also discovered that persistence coupled with attention to detail could turn apparent failures into advantages. He navigated a labyrinth of social expectations, economic limitations, and cultural norms, constantly recalculating, weighing consequences, anticipating responses, and adjusting his actions accordingly. The townspeople still largely ignore him, but those who did notice often underestimated his intentions. They assumed he was acting without strategy or understanding, but in reality, he was observing, analyzing, and learning everything that happened around him, using the smallest pieces of information to inform his next move. And as I followed the story, it became clear that tension was not just a product of external pressures. It was amplified by internal conflicts, by doubts, by the constant weighing of risk and reward, by the awareness that any wrong step could ruin everything. And he felt the weight of that responsibility. With every choice he made, small victories were celebrated privately, setbacks were absorbed and analyzed. Every interaction became an experiment, every outcome a lesson, and slowly patterns began to emerge. The stranger started to exploit weaknesses in the system, the inefficiencies in communication, the gaps in knowledge, the assumptions that others took for granted, and through these subtle manipulations, he created leverage that nobody else could see. Yet every advantage came at a cost, a balance of patience, timing, and courage that had to be maintained to avoid detection and disaster. The more he acted, the more complex the network of consequences became, and tension escalated accordingly. He encountered moments where he had to choose between immediate gains and long-term strategy, between risk and caution, between visibility and invisibility, and each decision sharpened the stakes and honed his understanding of the fragile ecosystem he was operating within. It was a delicate dance, a sequence of calculated risks and responsive adjustments that required constant attention, adaptability, and foresight. As events unfolded, he faced opposition in unexpected forms, a casual remark that could spark suspicion, a misinterpreted gesture, a rival taking notice and attempting to undermine his efforts. Yet he persisted, learning to navigate these complications not through force, but through strategy, timing, and subtle influence, observing how people reacted to small changes in the environment and using that information to guide his next steps. The tension built incrementally as the consequences of previous actions converged and the potential for discovery or failure loomed ever larger. The story became a web of interlocking decisions, cascading consequences, and mounting pressure. Every day, he moved cautiously, yet decisively, testing limits and learning from feedback from both successes and failures. He discovered that the key was not speed, but perception, understanding, not brute force, and the ability to read the environment and the people around him. Every interaction became a test, every moment an opportunity or a risk, and the complexity of the situation grew as he layered strategies, anticipated responses, and positioned himself to take advantage of openings as small as a glance, a pause, a hesitation, and even the smallest detail became critical to maintaining progress and avoiding disaster. As I analyzed this part of the story, I realized the genius of what he was doing lay not in bold, dramatic actions, but in quiet, relentless attention and adjustment, in the accumulation of tiny decisions that collectively created something extraordinary. The suspense came from knowing that at any moment something could go wrong, that all the careful planning could unravel in an instant. Yet he remained focused, calm, patient, and determined, learning from every error, exploiting every opening, and slowly building toward the moment that would define the story. The tension was compounded by uncertainty, by the unpredictability of human behavior, and by the fragile nature of his position. Yet he continued to move forward, weaving a complex tapestry of influence and effect, a pattern that would soon reveal itself in ways that nobody could foresee. The challenges escalated further as resources became scarce, trust became tenuous, and stakes became higher. Every day, he faced new obstacles requiring innovative thinking and decisive action. The suspense grew as seemingly ordinary events threatened to derail weeks of careful preparation, and the audience begins to feel the pressure as the story moves inexorably toward the point of no return. Every decision matters, every action contributes to the outcome, and the stranger understood this perfectly, mastering the art of subtlety, influence, and timing as he navigated an increasingly hostile, unpredictable, and complex environment. And the stage was now fully set for the point of no return, the decisive moment where all of these threads of tension, conflict, and strategy would converge. And that is exactly where the next chapter begins, the turning point that will shock you with its brilliance and audacity. Then came the moment when everything changed, when the invisible threads he had been weaving for weeks suddenly converged and revealed a path that nobody else could see. It was a decision that seemed small to an outsider, a subtle maneuver, a choice that most people would have ignored, but in that instant it became the catalyst for transformation. He recognized an opening that had gone unnoticed, a gap in the system, a momentary lapse in attention from those around him, and he acted without hesitation. With precision and courage that belied the quiet nature of his persona. This was the point where preparation met opportunity, where patience met intuition, where observation met action, and the results were immediate, profound, and irreversible. As I watched the events unfold, it was clear that the stranger had reached the apex of his strategy, the culmination of countless minor adjustments, choices, and calculations, and in one bold stroke he shifted the trajectory of events in a way that would ripple far beyond that town, beyond the people who had been skeptical or dismissive, and even beyond what he himself could fully comprehend. The turning point revealed the depth of his understanding of human behavior, of timing, of risk, and of subtle influence. He had anticipated reactions, he had mapped possibilities, he had accounted for contingencies, and yet the sheer audacity of acting in that precise moment elevated everything to a level that nobody expected. The unexpected convergence of opportunity and preparation created a domino effect, each action triggering another, each decision reinforcing the next, and suddenly the consequences of weeks of quiet, careful maneuvering became undeniable. And as I pieced together what had happened, it struck me that this moment was not about luck or chance, but about mastery of awareness, strategy, and timing. The turning point was both inevitable in retrospect and shocking in real time. A single choice that changed everything, and the tension that had been building exploded into revelation. The stranger, who had been invisible, uncertain, and underestimated, became the center of a chain reaction that would alter perceptions, outcomes, and influence decisions on a scale that nobody had anticipated. And the beauty of this moment lay in its simplicity disguised as subtlety. The action itself was not grandiose, it was precise, calculated, and quietly audacious, yet its impact was monumental. As the effects unfolded, the world around him began to shift in ways that were immediately apparent to those paying attention and astonishing to those who were not. The turning point marked the end of the struggle to gain leverage and the beginning of the realization that ordinary people can create extraordinary outcomes when they act decisively, informed by observation, strategy, and patience. And this moment also set the stage for the climax, the apex of tension and impact, where the full scope of his actions would be revealed. The turning point was both a revelation and a bridge. It connected the painstaking buildup of the previous chapters to the dramatic unveiling of consequences and significance that was about to come. And as I reflect on it, I see that it embodies a principle that transcends the story, the idea that preparation, perception, and courage converge to create moments that can change everything. And with that understanding, we move directly into the climax, the moment where the suspense, the stakes, and the strategy converge to produce the full magnitude of the stranger's achievement, the point where the story reaches its emotional and narrative peak. And that is exactly what comes next, the apex, the climax, the moment you will not forget. Just when it seemed like everything had settled, when the consequences of the stranger's actions had been fully realized, there came a subtle twist, a final revelation that nobody expected, yet in retrospect made perfect sense. The impact of his quiet influence reached places beyond his awareness, affecting decisions, communities, and lives in ways that echoed far beyond the original setting. And the most remarkable part was that he never sought recognition, never desired fame or credit for what he had accomplished, yet his legacy was undeniable. The ordinary person had become an agent of extraordinary change. The subtlety of his methods, the patience, the observation, and the courage combined to create a lasting mark on the world. And as I reflect on the story, the lesson becomes clear that history is not only shaped by the obvious, powerful, or famous, but also by those who act with insight, determination, and integrity in silence and invisibility. And as you watch this story unfold, you can imagine the countless ordinary people whose quiet actions ripple through the world in ways we will never fully see. The stranger's story is a reminder that opportunity, timing, and action converge in every life, waiting to be noticed, harnessed, and understood. And if you have been captivated by this story, if you have been amazed by the quiet brilliance, the subtle courage, and the extraordinary outcomes, then take a moment now to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this are rare stories that reveal the hidden potential of ordinary people. And as you do not forget that there is another video right now appearing on your screen, a video that will take you on a similar journey, revealing remarkable events and individuals whose actions quietly reshaped reality. And I encourage you to watch it immediately and continue exploring the world of extraordinary, ordinary people. And with that said, thank you for watching, for following the story, and for taking the time to witness the remarkable journey of a stranger who quietly made history. And I will see you in the next video.